Now that we have all the major components installed that we need on our Macintosh, there are a few configurations that we're going to need to make. First, we're going to configure Apache. We're going to need to learn to start and to restart Apache, as well as locate its preference file, which is going to be called httpd.conf. Then we're going to want to configure MySQL. We're going to want to set a root password, because right now people can log into our database by giving no password at all. And then we're going to want to set a path to MySQL, which is just going to make it a lot easier for us to use. And last, we'll configure PHP so that we can set up the right error reporting that we're going to want while we're developing. So let's begin by learning how to start and restart Apache. There's more than one way to start and restart your web server. The first is that you can go to your Apple menu and pull down to System Preferences. And then, from the Internet and Network category, pick Sharing. And under Services, you'll find an item called Personal Web Sharing, and you'll want to turn that on. You can simply select it so that it's highlighted, and then click Personal Web Sharing Start. It'll start up, and now Apache is running. So personal web sharing is going to be synonymous with Apache. When we start personal web sharing, we're starting Apache. When we turn off personal web sharing, we're turning off Apache. Now there's another way to do it as well. I'm going to close my system preferences. I'm going to open back up my terminal, which I have in my dock. You may still have it open from earlier, and that's fine. Since we already have Apache running, let's first learn to restart it. And we can do that by typing the sudo command, which is saying, do this as a super user. Do it using all of our access privileges to this machine. Followed by apache ctl, all one word. Apache control is a control command we're about to give, and that's going to be graceful. And that will gracefully restart the server. So we're going to use all of our access privileges to tell Apache to gracefully restart. And it comes back and it tells us that it did gracefully restart. And you remember we talked about earlier that HTTPD is practically synonymous with Apache. It's the shorthand for the web server. And we can do the same thing by issuing a sudo apache ctl stop, and we can stop our web server, or sudo apache ctl start. And that'll come back and give us some information about some of the preference files that it's pulling in and using while it restarts. But in the end, it tells us that it did start up. You'll notice there that one of the preference files it loaded was entropy-php.conf. That's actually pulling those PHP preferences that we loaded in with that package file. And that's how it knows which version of PHP we want. Those are additional configuration files that it's loading. So to look at the regular configuration file that Apache is going to use, we're going to use cd to change directory. And then we're going to go to a path that's very similar to what's being used above. We're going to use /private/etc/httpd, and then instead of users, we're going to go ahead and just hit return. If we look in this directory, which we can do with the ls command to show us what's in the directory, you'll see that there's something in there called httpd.conf. That's the first file that's in there. This is the main Apache configuration file. Now, it might be in a slightly different place on your machine, but that's almost always going to be the configuration file that Apache is going to use, and locating that will configure the main preferences. Now, you'll notice that there's a couple of other versions of it there that have a dot with something after it. Apple saved, .back, .default. You'll see Entropy made a backup of it. That's because making a mistake in that conf file can stop Apache from working. So it's always a good idea to make a backup of that file first before you start making changes to it. Now at this point, we don't actually need to make any changes to that file. I just want you to know where it lives so that in the future, if it comes up, you'll know exactly where to go and have a little bit of a clue about how Apache is doing what it does. So next we're going to move on to the MySQL configuration. And the first thing we're going to do is set the path to MySQL. That's going to make it a lot more convenient for us to work with it. Right now, if we type on our command line, which MySQL, you'll see that it comes back and it tells me that there is no MySQL found in a certain set of folders. But those folders don't include the folder where we installed MySQL. And that's exactly the problem. You'll remember when we asked for the MySQL version earlier, we had to type in a very long path of folders to tell it where to find MySQL. It'd be much nicer if instead it could go directly to MySQL whenever we wanted it to. So let's clear our screen with clear. And then let's switch back to our main user directory. And we can do that with cd space and the tilde sign. And that'll take us back to our root user directory on the Mac. And that for me is going to be Kevin. It'll probably be whatever your username is for you. Now, if you're running macOS 10.3 or later, you're going to want to type the following command exactly as I do. Echo, with a single quote, export, space, path in all capital letters, equals, $, all capital, path, then colon, /usr/local/mysql/bin, and a single apostrophe again. Now, if your MySQL was installed somewhere else, then you'll want to put that path in place of the user local MySQL bin that I've just typed. And then we're going to put a space, followed by 2 greater than signs, a tilde, a /, and then .bash_profile. And it wrapped around on me because my screen ran out of room, but for you it should all fit. And now once I've got all that typed, and you've double-checked it to make sure that it's typed correctly, and you really want to make sure that you've done it so you don't have to go back and re-edit this, then you're going to hit return. And it won't come back and tell you anything. But if we type cat space .bash profile, that's the file we just created, we should get that export that we just typed. So it should show up in that file. Basically, we put this piece of information into our bash profile. And this is a bit of Unix. You don't really need to understand exactly the syntax of what's happening here, but you understand that it's basically taking the path that it was using for looking for commands, and it's adding something else onto it, so that it knows to also look in this directory for those commands. And now if we quit out of our terminal window, and I'm going to do that by simply hitting Apple W and open a new one with Apple in, then now when I say which MySQL, you'll see that it actually knows where MySQL is located. So we've successfully set the path to the right place. And now we're ready to set the root password. And with recent installations of MySQL, there's a nice, friendly, easy way to do that. We do another super user do command, that's sudo, and mysql_secure_installation. And this is going to run a nice little program that's going to do everything we need it to do to set up the root password for us. This used to take a few other steps using mysql admin. And if you're familiar with how to do it using the mysql admin tool, you're welcome to still do it that way. And it wants my password. Now that's my super user password that it wants, my root password that gives me access to this system to do such a high-level function. So I'm going to type that in here. And it wants to know what is my current password for root. Now, you probably don't have a password if you've never installed MySQL before. If you were upgrading it from a previous version, then you may already have a root password, and you'll want to enter that here. So then I'll hit enter. So you'll see that for me it comes up and it says that I already have a root password set, so I can safely say, no, I don't want to change the root password, but if I do, I could say yes. I'm going to go ahead and say yes and give it a new root password, and that way you can follow along with me and give it the same password. I'm going to make my new password be capital O, lowercase t, lowercase l, that's for online training library, and then all capital PHP 07. And that's going to make it a little more secure by having some numbers in it. So again, it's going to be capital O, lowercase t, lowercase l, all capital PHP 07. And once you enter the password twice, it'll come up and say, success, I've changed your root password, and it's going to ask you for a few other security-related things. You're going to want to answer yes to all of these. Remove anonymous users? Yes. Disallow root login remotely? Yes. Remove test database and access to it? Yes. Reload privileges table now? Yes. And with that, it's done everything that we needed it to do to be all set up and secure to get started using our database. Now that we have MySQL configured, the very last step is going to be configure PHP. PHP gets all of its configurations from a file called php.ini. So we're going to change directory to where that php.ini file is located. And if you followed along with me earlier, it's going to be in this location. So you're going to type cd for change directory, space, usr/local/php5/lib, and then a final slash. And that's where the file is going to live. So we're going to hit return. It's going to take us to that directory. And if we type the ls for listing again, you'll see that we get a long list of all the files in that folder, one of which there at the bottom is php.ini. And they've also given us a php.ini recommended that we could also work with if we wanted to use what Entropy has recommended for us. Now to edit this file, we're going to want to use a text editor that's inside the terminal instead of a regular word processor or something like that. And we can do that with, again, issuing our sudo command for superuser_do. And then the text editor on Mac is going to be called nano, N-A-N-O. And then we can just type php.ini. And it'll open up the php.ini file. You'll see that there's some basic commands at the bottom that we can use. The upwards arrow that's in front of each of those letters is actually the control key. So if you hit the control key followed by the V, for example, you'll get the next page. You'll see that there in the menu, so I'm going to do that now. And we can scroll down and we can read all of this. It'll give us information about what all of these configuration options and settings are. But there's two that are going to be particularly important to us right now. And we're going to scroll on down until we get to error reporting, because that's what we're concerned with while we're developing. And you see here I am at error handling and logging. So that's the section that we're going to want to be in. And it gives us all sorts of information about the kinds of errors that we can have reported back to us. And then after we're done with that, you'll see that there's a line down here where it says error_reporting equals capital E underscore capital all. And that's going to let us know that all errors are currently going to be reported. Everything that has a semicolon in front of it has actually been commented out of this file. So this line is actually active, and this is where we would set it if we wanted to change it to something else. Now that setting is fine. That's what you should have there. And I'm almost certain that you will if you've used the Entropy installer that I talked about earlier. If not, you'll want to change this so that it uses the all feature. And the last one that we're going to want to go down to, and you can just use your arrow keys to get down to the specific line that you want, is display_errors equals off. And we're just going to want to change that. And we're going to just cursor over using the arrow keys and then hit backspace and make it say on. So now it's going to say display_errors equals on. And the last thing we're going to do after we've made that change is do the exit command. You'll see down there in the lower left corner, Control X. And it's going to ask us, do we want to save our changes? And answering no is going to throw out our changes. It's going to be as if we just closed the document without changing it. So we're going to want to say yes, we do. We'll do a Y. Just type Y on your keyboard. And it'll say, where do you want to write it? And we're going to call it the same name, php.ini. So we just have to hit a return on the keyboard. And now it's saved it. And we could go back in and actually check and make sure our changes were there. But PHP's configuration has now been changed. But PHP is loaded in each time when the web server starts. So if our web server is already running, we need to restart it. I don't actually remember whether I started it before or not, but we know how to do it. It's going to be sudo apache ctl graceful, and it gracefully restarted our web server. So now our PHP settings have been reset. It's read our new file in from both Apache and from PHP, and we're ready to get started. And the last thing we need to do is make sure that we have a good text editor that we can edit our code with. And that's what we'll do in the next movie.